19th, 2026. This is Ken Rose. We are at the Juneteenth Celebration. Do I have permission to film this interview today?
Sure,
All right, can
yes.
you just state your name for the camera, please?
Nubia Kai.
All right, Ms. Kai. And what event are we at today? What are we celebrating?
Well, we're celebrating Juneteenth, which was the day in which actually the last of the enslaved people in the South, that is, the states that had seceded from the Union, from the United States, were set free by the colored troops, United States colored troops from various parts of the country. And it happened 2 years after they should have been liberated, after the Emancipation Proclamation was passed. But some of them didn't know about it, or if they didn't know about it, Texas was not going to let them know. They were not going to let them go. Texas, had fought a war with Mexico. When Mexico, in fact, it was the black president of Mexico, Vincent Guerrero, abolished slavery in 1827. So Texas, which was part of Mexico, was just beginning to get a lot of people coming in, and they had cattle and other things. So they had actually pulled a lot of the Fulani people from West Africa to come to the United States. And that's where you get the term cowboy, because the Fulani had even the cowboy hats and stuff. And that's what they called these enslaved people that they brought from West Africa who had this specialization in cattle herding. So they're flooding in, and then you have a lot of poor whites who were working as patrollers who didn't have land or slaves. They wanted to become planters as well. So they're flooding into Texas. So at a time when they're really, really growing, boom, they abolish it. That's why you got the Lone Star State. It's the same as the Confederate flag in terms of what it means. The expansion of slavery, you're right, and the expansion of slavery and the legalization that it would remain in that state, and that's why they pulled away. And it really goes back to the United States and why they pulled away from Britain, because Britain was getting ready to abolish the slave trade. And they already had a treaty with the Native Americans under the British colonial system that they would not go past the Appalachian Mountains. But people like George Washington and Jefferson and other founding fathers had already broken that oath, and had already confiscated land beyond Appalachia. And not only that, they were actually selling land that didn't even belong to them. That's what George Washington was doing. That's why they wanted to break away from Britain and also manifest destiny. That was the real goal. So we talk about a revolution. Come on. It wasn't a revolution. It was actually an imperialist war to expand the territory of the United States, that is, to take away the lands of the Native American through a systemic genocide, and to expand the institution of slavery throughout the country. That was the goal and objective of the founding fathers. I know I'm getting away from the Civil War, but all of these things are tied together. So actually the American flag, when we talk about what it represents the legalization and spread of slavery and the genocide of the Native Americans. The Lone Star State, the one star, represents Texas breaking away because they wanted to keep slavery in their state and expand it in the United States flag, all right? The Confederate flag, which we know symbolizes the slavery, right? The establishment of slavery. So all three flags really represent the same thing. The reason, so Juneteenth, again, and this has been a problem, why it's taken so long and why it was celebrated in Texas and not all over the country. Because many people felt like they were not free. And really, we weren't really totally free, and we still aren't. And we've heard a lot of talk about slavery by another name. All they did was create these private prisons, which some of them, many of them had been former plantations, right? Black people were put in prison for breathing, literally breathing around black. If 3 black people were standing around, you got picked up for loitering. If you were just walking down the street and you did not have a pass or paper saying that you were an apprentice of a white person, which meant you were their slave, their sharecropper, you were put in prison for that. Just minor things that they corralled black men and women and put them back into these prisons. The mass incarceration started then. So that's why it took a long time. And even with the things that are going on now, I'm talking to friends who are questioning, why are we celebrating? We should be in the streets demonstrating, protesting, uh, civil disobedience, even guerrilla warfare for that matter, because we see slavery being reinstitutionalized, legalized through ICE. All ICE is human slave trafficking of black people and people of color. In this case, we're speaking of people from other countries, but believe me, we're next. And we're still picking up a lot of African Americans. A lot of people who are in this country legally are being picked up, kidnapped off the streets, put into detention centers in other countries. They're not sending them back to their countries. And they're not sitting in those detention centers playing dominoes. Those are free slave labor camps. And they're concentration camps, and they're building them all over the world. All over the world. In every major city in the United States, all through Central America, South America, even in Africa. Libya, Liberia. I'm hearing about all these countries. What are they're building so many, and who are they going to put in there? So that's why, why are we really free? That's the real question, especially in 2026. Because we see people being kidnapped, re-enslaved right here in this city where we're speaking, right? ICE is here, and they're talking about building some big detention center here, right? So there's a feeling of, well, wow, we shouldn't even be celebrating. It's nothing to celebrate. And this is, again, why it has taken so long. Now they used to have something called the Watchers Night. And the Watchers was more or less in celebration of the Emancipation Proclamation, which happened on January 1st, 1863. And what they used to do, and a lot of times people even know it was connected to the Civil War. They used to have this thing called Watcher Night. And so black people would go to church on New Year's Day, January 1st. And they would be very, very quiet, almost like a reenactment of slipping away in the night, slipping away from slavery. That's the kind of feeling I got. I used to go with my grandmother. I had no idea what it was about, though. You see what I'm saying? That it was about, the celebration of our freedom. But a lot of people grew up with that. And then during the Black Liberation Movement, Civil Rights Movement, people started talking about Juneteenth again, and making it a larger holiday, not just something that was practiced just in Texas. And then you had the Texans who were all over the country, and they would have it in, other parts of the country where they live. But people, still didn't know about it. Now there's a fear again of it being commercialized once it becomes a national holiday, and, so that's another issue that I've been talking about with friends.
You said we shouldn't be celebrating, there's nothing to celebrate, but it's very good for us to congregate in a space like this, like the African American Civil War Memorial, and commemorate the lives and the stories that haven't been told, and the lives and the stories that will be told in the future, especially as the administration goes on.
Right.
How we use our own gifts and what we can give to this community or what have you. So how do you give back to this community? What is something that you are passionate about?
Well, just like the event here today, in the calling of the names of those soldiers who fought in Texas to liberate the enslaved people in Texas. I do think it's very important. I was just telling you the discussions that are going on. It's not necessarily my feeling, because even though I know we're far from freedom and that we are a colonized, semi-enslaved people, even right now, and especially now where they're just stripping our history, stripping our civil rights, again, picking up, again, people of African descent, detaining them and putting them back in slavery. Even though that's going on, I still understand that there's a huge difference between having a slave status and a free status, even though it wasn't totally free. That is huge. And so I'm for, I've always uh, felt that we should commemorate that, but not just through cookouts and partying with no political, you know what I'm saying, with no political or social commentary or action, right? So I'm saying we should do more than just celebrate the emancipation. We should be engaged in actually getting our emancipation, which we still don't have.
All right. Can you just tell Madison here about the poems that you had read today at the ceremony? Just kind of what those mean to you into the celebration.
Yeah. The poetry that I read comes from a collection of poems that I've done on blacks in the Civil War. And I was kind of inspired to do this collection after hearing he was a professor at Howard, and he was the chairman of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. He was the chairman of the board, or president, I'm saying, of the board. He spoke in an event that they have every year in honor of Carter Woodson, and it's like a fundraiser during February. And he was talking about how every generation of African Americans think they're the best generation, that they're the smartest, that they're the most progressive, they're the most socially and politically conscious. You know, I know we felt that way in the 60s, right? That generation. The generation during the 20s, during the Black Renaissance movement, they felt like they were the best generation. What Daryl Scott, Professor Scott, was saying, he started talking about the generation of the Civil War. And his position was that was actually the best and most progressive generation of African Americans in our history. And that's how I got interested in studying what people did during that time and in writing this book called Jubilee, which focuses on blacks in the Civil War.
Interesting. And is there
Okay.
anything else you would like to add?
No, because you all look like you're all ready to go, like you all trying to rush. And I wasn't even thinking about doing the interview, but Sir Lillian said I should do it. But see, because I know once I start, I don't stop. I just blah, 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 start running my mouth.
Okay, well, thank you
So
so
I'm
much.
good. Thank you. Good luck on your studies.